please help me all in welcoming Kathy Wang. Ah, there she is. Thank you so much, Kathy. All right, I'm so excited about this.
Me too. I'm excited to be here. Hi, everyone.
It's at the intersection of like two really, really hot trends, AI and augmented reality. Well, let me start introducing you a little bit. So Kathy has been in the AR industry for now many, many years. So she truly has like some battle scars to prove it, and lots of experience that we all can learn from. So she's just transitioning from leading TikTok's creative tools. You launched Effect House as one of the many things. You scaled the AR ecosystem and the Creator Fund. Your ex-Magic Leap, I understood you come there from Andreessen Horowitz, like putting the money in there and then like putting the money to good use on the other side of things. So you've been in spatial computing, as it's called now, for quite a while. And you have like a storied history before that. You have a Wharton and Harvard MBA. So I'm really, really keen to learn from you where we are in this like really, really intersection of these hype topics of AI and AR. So let's dive right into it. So where are we right now in AI and AR and in all these creative workflows? What is the state of the industry right now from where you see it?
Yeah, well, first, it's really great to be here. Thank you guys for sticking around for the last session. I know it's been a long day and great talk so far. First time in Romania, I'm really excited to be here. So to your question, I think maybe there's like two ways that I typically think about it. One would be, if you think about it from like a hardware stack perspective, right? I think we're still very, very early from that perspective. We maybe are starting to build out some of the infra layer, right? Obviously, both from an AI perspective and an AR perspective. And then, one level above that, from the hardware stack perspective, maybe early rumblings of what sorts of new form factors we might get for AI, but there's not really been like it, with every new kind of shift in a computing paradigm, you usually will have some sort of like native hardware that is able to really take advantage of the benefits of that specific computing paradigm. And for AI, that's something where I think we're all still waiting to see what that will look like. I think for AR, we've obviously seen many different iterations of it from glasses and headsets, maybe something smaller scale, but I think there it's still very much an open field, and there isn't really like a very clear answer to what that will look like. And then, of course, on top of the hardware layer, you finally have like your software operating system. I think for that, it's still quite early, right? We don't really know. Like it probably won't look something like a like a search browser. What will the new sort of like more native version of that look like in the age of AI? I think those are still all open questions. And then finally, you have like more of the app layer, right? Like what will the actual experiences, whether it's more enterprise or consumer, what will that look like? So I think it's wide open field, which makes me very excited. I think there's so many opportunities for entrepreneurs, for founders who are interested in building in the space. Obviously, it's there are things that are much more difficult to work as a full stack. I think that's one of the most challenging things. Is it really has to be a full stack for it to work. But I'm very excited to see what happens.
Yeah, no, it's truly like a very, I feel now it's kind of an exciting time, but I'm also like, there's been also like people for the last few years said, oh, this year is going to be the year of AR. This year is going to be the year of AR, right? Like when Apple released the Vision Pro, a lot of people say like, oh, now it's going to like really come true, and it hasn't quite like panned out at least yet. So in 2025, do you think is now the year of the breakthrough, or when do you think it's going to happen?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to say. I think it will be. I like we were saying earlier, I think I'm a skeptical optimist when it comes to things like timing. I'm always hopeful that things will happen sooner. But I think realistically, I think 2025, we are starting to see maybe some of the new like standards get formed, right? Whether it's with MCP or things in the AI space, even with AR, I think people are rallying around maybe some of the new interaction modalities. But I think there are still a lot of open questions. So I don't think necessarily that in 2025 we will kind of, figure it out per se. But I do think that it's an important year for progress, and maybe we start to see some of the earlier use cases. And I think what we have now is, there's maybe different components that are starting to be formed, right? So, for example, when you're thinking about creating an AI and making content, now you maybe are able to create like individual pieces of content, like video or visuals, or you can create music, you can create audio and sound, but you still maybe need other services to kind of put it all together, right? Or to edit it and to really have that control layer. So I think the components are maybe in place, but how we kind of tie that all together is maybe will take a bit longer to form.
What maybe flipping the question a bit, what would you need to see that you're convinced now it's going through the roof? What would like the thing be that you say, once we have solved that, right, like I said, like there's the components, maybe they need to be put together. What would it be? Would it be like a specific device? Would it be an app? What is like the thing where you say, now I'm super bullish that it's going to go through the roof?
Right. I would say a few things. Maybe form factor for hardware is one piece. I think something else that's quite interesting is around interaction modalities, right? So how do we interact with this new type of content? Like, for example, I remember when back in the Magic Leap days, even in 2017, we were thinking about like what types of content, and I remember seeing some of the early demos, and they're all like, you look at a window, and then, okay, how do we exit the window? There's a little X button in the corner, right? And you're looking at things in 3D, and you're like, we're still in this sort of very 2D paradigm of how we think about interacting with the content, right? So if you're really thinking about truly like 3D space, right, and things are visual, it's really limitless, like how you can interact with that content. And I feel we have not yet sort of broken through and found more native ways of engaging with that content, whether it's something that's more interactive, right, or whether it's something that's more maybe spatial, like truly understanding your space and your environment and being able to map content to that. I think those are the things where, multimodal, I think there's a lot of talk about multimodal today, but I do think that's like a pretty powerful way of being able to engage with the content in many different ways based on, if you're in a quiet room and you can't talk, you don't want to use something like voice. But maybe if you're in a sort of like different kind of environment, maybe that's the right modality. There's a lot of exciting sort of like developments there that I'm quite excited to see. So I think those are things we're still figuring out, and I think once there's more progress on that, it'd be pretty exciting to see.
Super interesting. It reminds me a lot of the early days of mobile, right? Where everything was just a scaled desktop app, and then once people figured out that you need to design different experiences.
Exactly.
So I can resonate with that. A lot of the AR experiences feel just like a copy paste of the mobile experiences, which, as you highlighted well, does just not like work super well because it's not made for that form factor. So let's go a little bit to Effect House and what you've built at TikTok. So maybe, I'm not sure if the audience is familiar, so maybe we can share a little bit about that, and then we'll dive into scaling that.
Yeah, sure. So one of the first projects that we launched at TikTok, we didn't really have anything that was in the AR space when I joined. And so I would say that was one of the interesting challenges was like, does AR make sense for TikTok to pursue? And there were other kind of AR platforms out there, right? There was Lens Studio or Spark AR for those who might be familiar. And for TikTok, some people assume maybe we did it because there were other platforms out there. But if you think about what TikTok is, it's really a platform to enable creators to express themselves, right? And we always think about like, how do you lower the bar for creation? How do you lower the floor, and how do you like raise the ceiling? How do you make it easier than ever for people to create, but at the same time, widen the boundaries of the possibilities of the things that they can create? And so AR is a perfect example of that, right? Where on the one hand, you make it much easier because you sort of like almost give people a template through the effect, right? Like you're building in some of those tech capabilities so that they don't have to go and build these things themselves, right? If you want to do a face filter or something and you don't really know how, you don't want to be like, programming, like how do I exactly make this? But at the same time, like it enriches like the sorts of content you can make. You can enhance yourself, you can enhance your environment. And so it really broadens the types of content that you can then make. And so I think that was what was so powerful for us to sort of support AR as a strategy strategy from a company perspective. And then I think, from a creator perspective, one of the main challenges getting started is it's a completely new sort of like creator persona, right? Whereas TikTok fundamentally is still a short form video platform. And so the types of creators who make video content are not the same as those who are making, AR content, which is much more sort of developers and designers, folks with, 3D kind of backgrounds, gaming backgrounds. And so we really had to sort of tell this message of why these sorts of new types of creators and creative technologists should be leveraging TikTok, and then sort of provide that education for them to get up to speed on how to create the sorts of content that will perform well and resonate well with users on TikTok, which is very different than other platforms out there that may have had similar AR platforms.
This is very interesting. So you had to scale this inside TikTok, which is itself growing like wildfire. So what was the hardest thing for you when you had to like scale this entirely new paradigm, which doesn't necessarily mean all the existing creators are going to be great at it? So what was the hardest part for you to scale this new paradigm inside a large growing organization?
Yeah, so I would say two things. One, from a maybe a organizational perspective, is getting that internal buy-in, right? And getting the support from folks internally even to have them understand even why we needed to support this. And then I would say the other piece is, if you think about like AR effects, it's almost like a different format of content, right? It's very different than video, and in some ways it's much more complex than a video, because video, at least it's sort of static. You have this one defined piece of content, whereas with an effect, a lot of times it's interactive, and based on how the user engages with it, it may perform in different ways. So that becomes quite challenging when you think about things like content moderation, where for videos you would review the video, and you can sort of use machine learning to sort of detect what's inside the video, and then moderate that. But with effects, it's much more difficult, because based on how the user might interact with it, it may in one way seem okay, but in another way, maybe there may be certain challenges with that piece of content. So building out, we essentially had to build out the entire end-to-end workflow that we had for video content, and now use that, basically like recreate that in a different way for effects. So if you think about from a creation perspective, right, Effect House is a desktop tool. TikTok never had a desktop tool before, right? Everything was on mobile, so having a standalone desktop app, and then having the creation process around that, and then thinking about the publishing flow, and then surfacing all of the effects into our discovery and recommendation pool for the algorithm to be able to surface out to our video creators, and then being able to of course like moderate that content, and then think about how we handle things like monetization and supporting the creator ecosystem. So kind of building out that entire flow from scratch, and with limited ability to leverage the existing TikTok infrastructure that we had built for video. That was probably one of the major challenges.
Sounds like you're up against quite like big hurdles which you've overcome. So what was an early like creator feedback that has surprised you and that ended up like shaping the roadmap of what you would build?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there were a couple of different things. I would say one of the things that really helped us, maybe not as surprising, but we weren't quite sure which direction to take it, was around the initial set of capabilities that we really focused on. Like I mentioned before, there were other AR platforms out there, and we could take one of two approaches, which was one, sort of benchmark ourselves against capabilities that creators might already be familiar with and might be expecting, certain capabilities that maybe existed on the market in other platforms. But we actually heard through sort of like focus groups that we did earlier on that what creators really cared about is quite unique capabilities that could only be possible on TikTok, right? So that meant things like focusing on music or audio, obviously as an audio first kind of platform, and thinking about really like interactive content. I think that was the piece that really allowed a lot of our earlier pieces of AR effects to become viral and gain the traction that they did, was this focus on like interactive content, whether that's more gaming, like mini games or randomizers or other types of content that really allowed a video creator to tell a story. Because at the end of the day, TikTok is about storytelling, and so I think the types of effects that ended up performing the best were those. And so we really took this early focus on storytelling and sort of more interactive features versus maybe benchmarking what was out there.
on a more like your personal experience with AR and AI. What's your personal AI/AR experience and why?
Yeah, like personal favorites and
An
stuff around
app, a
that. Yeah.
filter, like something like that you said, like that really like you're saying like this is really cool, this is really or really useful, right? Like can be anything.
Right. I think with AR, the thing that there's maybe two types of content you can think about. Or one is like content where something is made much more like efficient, and I think that is great. I think with AR, the where it really excels is when you think about, okay, what can I create that just purely was not possible before, right? That I just could not create if this technology was not there. So I really like things that have a lot of play around with like scale, and so whether it's like miniature or like massive size. So I remember one of our earliest viral effects was this effect called Shrek in the Sky. I don't know if many of you remember, but it's this giant like Shrek, right? And it would just be like, same height as like the Empire State Building or the Eiffel Tower. And it really generated this trend on the platform where our creators would go all around the world to these like famous landmarks and have this like Shrek just like dancing behind the Eiffel Tower or like behind the Empire State Building. And it's something that's so recognizable, but at the same time so surreal, right? And I think that juxtaposition is just so fun to see, where you can take something that feels very familiar and bring it into a new light. So I think that's quite powerful from an AR perspective. And then from an AI perspective, I love to see content where it really allows creators who may not necessarily have the skill sets to make something, but have the ideas, and AI really empowers them to really express themselves. Right? I think that's where it's sometimes at its best. So with a lot of, one of the toughest things for our creators to make is logic and interaction logic, right? Because it's a visual scripting platform, so there's like node-based graphs, and you have to build in logic, which can be quite difficult when you're thinking about like making very complex interactions, like trying to build like a game. And so with AI, I think some of the most powerful experiences have been where creators have been able to, create a game without any sort of like programming, any sort of like experience, and to be able to do that from scratch, I think is pretty cool to see.
I totally agree. I mean, for me, like my entire career, technology was empowering people to create stuff. And it blows my mind like how much more you can create now due to AI in a much, much shorter time. So that's a good topic to dive in a little bit more at the intersection. So can you share a little bit about the AI models that are powering all these like AR experiences that you've seen?
Yeah, so I would say we use a mix of, there's obviously ByteDance develops its own sort of like AI models. We also have leveraged open source as well as some of the other model providers out there. So I think based on there's obviously specific research teams that are focused on developing our own kind of AI models. But in terms of what the product teams will use and experiment with, we're quite open in terms of what is best for the apps and the products that we're trying to create.
So we've seen like with OpenAI, they had this amazing like Ghibli moment this year, right? Like for people not familiar, you could like take an image, upload it, and it would like Ghiblify you or create new images in Ghibli style or any other styles that you wanted. So do you think we'll get to this like prompt to AR 3D world pipeline in the near future? Is that kind of like one of the key things to make it easier? Or what do you think is like at the intersection of AI and AR, like the key breakthrough that we need?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there's a few ways to think about it. If you think about the creation kind of workflow, right, there's maybe you start with something like ideation of your idea, and then you think about like creation, the actual like creating, and then the editing and sort of like putting it together, and then you want to sort of like distribute it. I think there are multiple places in that creation workflow where AI can really kind of come in and help, into your point of like prompt or text to creation. I think two of the most powerful places, one is around like interaction, which I mentioned before. The other is really around creation of like 3D assets, 2D assets. That's frequently quite challenging for creators to do who maybe don't have a design background. So that's one area that's pretty powerful. And then I would say another piece that maybe is not talked about as much today is really around sort of like 3D intelligence, right? There's like different types of intelligence. I think a lot of what today we're focused on is like verbal intelligence around language, large language models. But I think in order to have truly sort of like AR 3D content, you need to have a really robust understanding of the physical world and of like the 3D world around you. So this sort of like spatial intelligence. And there are a couple of startups that are working on that, and I think that is quite compelling to really think about, like, can you create like a 3D world or sort of like understanding of our world, and maybe that requires even like a change in or an enhancement to today's like model architecture. Maybe you need some more fundamental understanding of physics and how the world works, and not just sort of sort of like mimicking what might be out there. So I think that space is super interesting, and I'm excited to see what startups and sort of founders build there. But I think that might be needed in order for us to get to this true like text to world sort of creation.
With all those tools, I'm curious if I have a second career as an like AR creator in the future. So definitely something I'll consider as the tools evolve. But in all seriousness, right? Like, I mean, we talked a little bit about, at the end, it's like building an ecosystem, right? Like, that's what it's about. We had like Lizzie talked a little bit about this earlier, the financial ecosystem, and AR is the same thing, right? Like, without the creators, it doesn't really work, because if only people consume these effects, but nobody's building them, then that's going to be very challenging. And that's where you spend some time on as well. So can you walk us through a little bit, like, how does the creator economy for augmented reality work? Where do people make money, or what is like the motivation for them?
Yeah, for sure. It's a great question. And I think we thought about this for a really long time when we started the platform, and when we thought about, how do we make sure that creators are rewarded and recognized for the work that they do. So we debated whether we should even have something like monetization from the get-go, and we made a very conscious decision initially to make sure that the foundation of the sort of AR creator ecosystem was based on passion, right? And that people wanted to create because they loved what they were doing and they wanted to make this. I think that really sort of elevates the ecosystem and elevates sort of like the creator sort of mindset. And so when we first started, we really wanted to make sure we built a very strong community. So we started a Discord. We sort of put folks together. We had a lot of like workshops and education, and sort of used this as an initial way to really get the creator ecosystem going. And then once we got to a point where we ensure that there was product market fit, right, and make sure that the types of content were what we wanted, then we started to think about monetization and sort of like cash monetization. And so there's a couple of different things we introduced. We launched Effect Creator Rewards, which was a fund for some of the top performing content, especially in encouraging the types of formats of content that we wanted to see more of on TikTok, right? So like I mentioned before, things like more interactive content versus, of course, things like makeup filters, beauty filters. Those are great and those are very popular, for example, but it may not be something that we, reward as much as if you were to make something that's more interactive, more like a game. So that's one big bucket, is high-performing content, especially made by creators who might be doing this more as like a side sort of like job almost. We also had a lot of like one-off challenges and contests and things to sort of incentivize creators who are still growing, who may not quite be at the top yet, to have a chance to share in the monetization. And then the third big bucket is really around brand partnerships, and that's quite a rich pool of different types of brands who want to work with creators and find ways to create branded content, sponsored content. So a lot of that revolves around big events, World Cup, Olympics. We always have a lot of different sponsors who want to work with our creators to create different types of content. They have different niches that they work in. So those are sort of like the three big buckets from a monetization perspective, how we think about it.
Okay, super cool. What was like the profile of the early creators? What were you like the people that were most excited to adopt it in the beginning?
Yeah, I would say it's definitely folks who have a very strong sense of storytelling and of like something that they want to express. So we had one woman, Laura. She was one of our kind of like earliest creators who had not really created that much content on Instagram or Snap or in these other platforms, and she made some of our early like viral randomizers and like beige flags and things like that. If you guys are familiar with that. But it's really like understanding how TikTok works and what sort of content resonates, right? And then thinking about different fun ideas. It's not even super complex from a technology perspective, right? It's not like she built like super complex, like kind of 3D content or things like that. It was just very simple, but it really sort of like drove this kind of like interaction and engagement with the content in a very fun way. So I think folks who really understood how to use TikTok as a storytelling platform.
Okay, that's good. We'll definitely invite you back for like a lesson in like social media and getting success there. Super interesting. So I want to spend the last few minutes of the session looking a little bit into the future, right? Like because that's as technologists we always like see what's the road ahead gonna provide. So what do you think will be the spatial computing platform like glasses? What are the key unlocks you're looking from the next generation hardware platform, specifically from glasses or similar form factors that you would look for?
Yeah, I think with hardware, it's always quite interesting because a lot of the things that work well in the last sort of computing paradigm may be the exact things that are hindering you for sort of the next shift. I think right now I am definitely looking at a lot of the new like interactions and sort of ways that we can engage with the content, whether it's like through a combination of, for example, I think the stuff with eye gaze is quite interesting with EMG and like wristbands. So I think, in the next couple of years, we'll definitely see perhaps one or multiple of these like new interaction paradigms start to become more mainstream. I am quite bullish on the combination of sort of like gesture and EMG along with eye gaze. I think that's pretty compelling, or with voice. I think initially, using our phone as a way to have some input as well, being able to control with more precision and more accuracy in a way that maybe through gestures or other things is still a little bit harder to do today. And then I think with glasses, I'm curious to see sort of like, how much we can push the boundaries when it comes to things like compute and battery life and weight. Those are, of course, like some of the more traditional challenges. But I'm optimistic that we'll be able to see, we were talking earlier, I think right now we're really approaching at it from two perspectives. Like on the very high end, we have a lot of enterprise use cases that are resonating well with companies where there's clear ROI and there's a clear problem that the device is solving. And so people are willing to pay more. People are willing to maybe pay some of the burden of like, it's heavy, it doesn't have great, battery life, but it's okay because it solves this clear pain point. And then on the maybe like from the bottom up, like more lower end perspective, from a consumer perspective, it's really things that, where it's maybe using like your normal everyday glasses, right? Like with the Meta Ray bands and things like that, where you're maybe providing just light enhancements, but it's also not that burdensome. So I think we'll see sort of this approach both from the lower end on the consumer side and then from the higher end on the enterprise side, and we'll maybe meet somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, no, I think when we chatted earlier, right, like the enterprise side is very interesting because you need to have an entry point in the market where it really solves a problem. So I think one thing I'd really love you to share with the audience is maybe like what is like one cool enterprise use case where you're seeing it really, the technology is ready to provide value even today.
Yeah, so there's a couple of different ones that I think from the enterprise really have resonated even for a couple of years now. I think one is really around like CAD and sort of like 3D design and how you can have different folks collaborating on, you can imagine having like a 3D model. Traditionally, it's very difficult, whether you're doing something for CAD or even like in a more medical use case, right? Like let's say you're looking at like an organ or looking, for like more of an educational perspective, but basically anywhere where you really need to visualize a 3D 3D representation of an object or a piece of, a floor plan, something like this, or a car, any sort of 3D object, that is quite powerful. And you can have multiple people in different countries looking at the same object and collaborating and annotating it together in real time. That I think is something that has been happening for years now. I think another is really in thinking about different setups of spaces. So this may not be something that everyone sort of immediately comes to mind, but in hospitals and in emergency rooms, it's very, very expensive to spend time, for example, setting up a tray of equipment and tools for a doctor who's operating. So even if you can save, I think it's something like 1 minute in an emergency room costs like $1 million or something like that for people to go in and spend the time and set up the equipment properly. So if you can, have your glasses or whatever it might be enhancing your vision, being able to tell you exactly where to place things, or maybe in a e-commerce setting, in a storeroom, right? So that's quite a powerful use case as well in sort of like a medical healthcare perspective. And then the other big one is really around remote assistance and learning, whether it's on the factory floor, instead of having to fly someone in, thousands of miles, and you can enable someone to see what you see, right? Trying to fix a piece of equipment or trying to set up a piece of equipment or learn how to operate a factory line, something like that, where there is, today the cost is so high to be able to, have someone come in from somewhere else, or be able to, teach each person on the operating in a factory setup how to do something. I think that is also quite a compelling use case that we've seen multiple times over already. So lots of different opportunities, and I think a lot more to come.
It's awesome that there's already value created, right? Like right now, which is often easy to forget. So if you were a founder going into augmented reality today, since we have many founders or aspiring founders in the audience, where would you place your big bet right now if you're going to space now?
Yeah, I would say, maybe thinking about how can you go back to first principles on a number of different levels, right? One, I think, is story, for more from a creator perspective. I think storytelling and thinking about the elements that make up a good story is still at the heart of good content, right? You're always going to need things like character development. You're always going to need things like plot. And so thinking about the fundamentals is, I think, will always be very, very important, no matter what the technology is, right? It's never going to substitute for things like a good story. And then I would say, in a world where there's going to be so much different types of content proliferation, whether it's user-generated content, AI-generated content, I think it's even more important to develop a sense of an authentic voice and a sense of trust with your users and with your community. And that will be, I think, more important than ever, because it will be easier than ever to create content, right? So the ones that really will rise to the top will be those who have the strong sense of trust and sort of an authentic voice. And then the third is just rethinking past traditional constraints of what is possible and how content should be. For 100 years, we have this when you think about a movie, you're okay, it's a director-led linear narrative based on where the director wants you to see on the screen. But that's not necessarily how we experience the real world, right? We see content in such rich ways. I can go over there and look at a piece of content or look at something on the floor that no one else pays attention to. And so in a movie or in a video or something like that, we should be able to have that same sort of rich experience and interaction with the content, right? And so sort of breaking past these traditional constraints, just because a format has been done a certain way doesn't mean it needs to be done that way in the future. And now the tools are finally here to allow us to create content in sort of a different way. I think that is quite exciting. So really thinking about what is it that I want to create, and then how can I leverage all of these tools today to help me get there, I think will be quite exciting.
Plenty of opportunities for founders, so many different threads to pull on. But let me close with one final question. What is your prediction for AR/mixed reality? Where does it stand in 2 years from now if we come back Techsylvania 2027? Where are we going to be?
Yeah, I mean, I'm optimistic that there will be maybe new, like at least one new hardware sort of form factor. I think that's something that I'm excited to see. I think maybe a new format of content as well, and I'm excited to see also more kind of consumer-based use cases as well, because I think that's an area where we're starting to see early signs of things that will maybe become more of killer use cases, but still not quite there yet. So I'm excited to see how that evolves as well.
All right. Well, I'm really excited for the future. Kathy, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.